Welcome, loves, to another episode of my podcast, That's Fine With Me. Today we're going to be talking about generations and arguments between generations. I was searching this topic and I didn't even know that we had that much generations. I guess it's really common among all of us seeing TikToks, and not only TikToks, but some Instagram reels where people were like, oh, I'm a millennial, and another one, the Generation Z, or maybe Gen Z. Okay, I guess we need to start from the beginning. The first ever generation that got a name was the Builders, because, well, basically they were building the foundation, the society that we live now, and it's kind of like rules, some laws. Of course, most of those laws were revised, in my opinion. I don't really know how to call it. And the structure that we live today and how the pace is going. So they grew up on the stories of the World War First, and then they actually, lived through World War Second. And of course, they had to sacrifice a lot of things in their life and give birth to a little bit different generation. The second one in a row is going to be the Boomers. So the Boomers, they were born from 1946 to 1964, and this is a generation of my grandma. My grandma actually was born in 1946, and she's almost 80. If I'm mistaken, she's 78. Well, I need to do math, but if I'm mistaken, she's 78. And this is a generation. Why did they call them Boomers? So when the Great Depression and World War II were over, the fertility rate was 3.5 kids per one woman. Of course, it's just general statistics. I'm not saying that every single woman was given birth to 3.5 kids, but you can get the math behind this. So boom, it caused a boom in the economy, in the structure, in the system, in housing, because a lot of people needed some new houses and construction. So this generation was developing a lot of, let's say, branches in different areas of life that led us to the society that we have right now, probably. But still, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. So it's infrastructure, and they participated in some protests. There was a rise of feminism. If I'm not mistaken, no, I guess it's more like to 70s. Hippies were in 70s maybe later on, but I guess those were boomers. So the change in the system happened because of the boomers, with all of this justice and people like manifesting and sitting around and protesting against everyone and everything. I guess it's quite obvious. Then comes Gen X. It's Generation X. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I guess it's X. So it started in 1965 and up until 1979. My parents, basically, my mom was born in 1974, my dad was born in 1974, and my uncle 1965, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, this is a Gen X. This label came from Douglas Coupland, and so that was a mantra of anti-establishment. So anti-establishment, pushing back authority figures, and of course, like some benefits from this time, from the previous, let's say, boomers in previous time, the economy, like economic freedom, basically, prosperity, and of course they embraced small business. So you can tell that, especially in the United States, the well spread, let's say, business branches that were developing on and on happened in 1970s, maybe in 1980s, maybe not even 70s, I guess 80s, maybe even 90s, but in 90s they were quite well developed. And we're going to talk about diversity in other countries a little bit later, because my parents, and of course I am myself, well, they came from Russia. They didn't even come from Russia. We still live in Russia. And the 90s were completely different from something that happened in maybe the United States or Europe back then. But I guess it was really, really hard time. And of course, I can't relate to the situation that they were pushing back some government and authority, especially that happened revolution in 1991, if I'm mistaken, or 1990, when there was a coup in Russia. And it was really, really scary times, and especially a lot of bands were, let's say, fighting back the society. I guess a lot of gangsters, they were ruling and they were not following the rules, and no one really cared about them. There was no system back then in Russian Federation, but it's just a little bit later when the Soviet Union cracked, a little bit later. But still, if we're talking about the United States, they managed to build a system of business, and it was thriving back then. And of course, Gen Y, or millennials, it's me. Okay. In 1980s, from 1980s to 1994, millennials were born. And basically, I don't even know if I am a millennial, like Gen Y, or maybe I am a Gen Z, because basically I was born on the 15th of December in 1994, almost 1995, and we're still going to talk about this cross, let's say, generations, because a lot of my classmates, they were from 1995. They were born in 1995, and we could relate, and we had the same hobbies, we had the same cartoons. So I can't say there's a huge gap between this. I guess maybe 2-3 more years they're crossing with the previous generation and the future generation. It's kind of like quintessential to see how these generations are kind of like taking their toll, let's say, and developing. And for millennials, I guess it's really, really popular that we are a little bit more independent in certain things, especially concerning some jobs and maybe studies. And, when I was reading an article about millennials, they were saying it's, in quotes, smashed AVO. I have no idea. It's like specialty coffee and traveling abroad, which is insane and crazy. But I do feel like my parents and of course my grandma, they weren't that crazy about traveling, and they could even travel around the country, but they weren't that crazy about traveling abroad. I mean, like other countries to see like sightseeing and whatever. And my generation is more like, I need to see the rest of the world. I want to see the other cultures and maybe try some different cuisines. It's really good for my generation, and I guess we kind of started this trend of traveling around the world. And of course, the housing prices, the wages that we're facing right now, it's really hard to afford any house or any apartments. And some people can do this, but most of the time the economy is shitty. And because of this, our generation, like millennials, they cannot afford a lot of things and have to, let's say, survive and maybe not be interested in purchasing a house, but probably thinking of the ways how to rent. Most of us are renting. And so it's shaped by certain events, experiences, and political climate. That's why we're a little bit different. But I guess we took a little bit from the Gen X and a little bit from Gen Z. So it's just like from the both worlds. But I guess every single generation gets something from the previous and the future generations. And if we're talking about Gen Z, it's like 1995 to 2008. No, 2009. And so they learn the economy. They have really nice standards that they're saving money first, and they're not willing to spend them as easy as probably previous generations. They're actually looking for security and stability in their life, and they're willing to purchase their own house compared to millennials, and they are willing to work hard. And I can say, just like financially, they don't really want to relate on someone. They want to be financially independent, but most of this generation is willing to work voluntarily. So they're not waiting some wages or money from others. So all this information that I'm sharing right now, I picked from an article because I have no idea, and I really wanted to get a deep dive into this topic because I always mix and don't understand the differences in generations, what is so different between them. And we're just going to dive into this a little bit later. And then generation or Gen Alpha, it's from 2010 to 2024. I mean, this year, mainly they started fresh, they started new, they're a little bit more independent. It's more about my brother. They are based on different technologies, and they're really crazy about technologies. I guess it started with the Gen Z, but most of the time with the generation Alpha, people are not even people, mainly like kids. They are into cell phones, into TikToks, and all of it is just probably a little bit like dinosaurs. I mean, Generation X is probably just like, what are you doing? And our, let's say, kids, because a lot of my generation, like from my generation, millennials, they are parents right now, and these are their kids. So basically, they are still in content with them, but maybe not as much as someone who's like Gen X, I guess. And of course, Generation Beta, it's going to be from 2025 to 2039. And of course, people are saying that they can only predict who these kids are going to be. So they're going to have a diversity in values, and they will probably combine technology with social, let's say, social events. It's probably, I guess, they're going to get the best from both worlds. I mean, millennials and probably Alpha, and maybe not even Beta. I guess millennials and Beta, they're a little bit similar because millennials, or maybe even Gen Z, we started let's say from nothing. We had absolutely no technology. We had no apps. We had no, let's say, cell phones. I'm not saying about this old cell phone that you could call is just a real phone. I'm saying about some computer, let's say, science behind this. And of course, YouTube. This was the era of the YouTube, of Instagram, and all of it, and TikTok much later. But mainly, we have the understanding what is happening in the real world where you can use your phone, and then still you have life outside of this world, where the Generation Alpha is more like my brother. He's an Alpha, Generation Alpha, and he is always constantly on his phone or tablets. And whenever I tell him just like go for a walk, it's so hard for him. And most of the time he's talking to his friends by the phone and he's just playing those games. A lot of the games, it's so weird that he's watching through YouTube. He's watching how someone is playing a game, but he's not doing this. He's not playing the game. So he's literally watching how my generation, or like my earlier generation, or maybe Gen Z, were playing back then in the day. I was acting like a teacher. I was acting like an accountant. I was acting like a searcher. Detective. I don't know. I was trying so many options, building houses, constructors, and some sort of designer, and fashion, and we were modeling, and we were like dressing up some dolls. And this was my generation, and Generation Alpha is just watching how my generation was acting back then. So they're not participating in this act. And now I want to talk about different generations in different countries because, well, most of you might know I'm from Russia. And of course, 90s and before even 90s, the Soviet Union, they kind of closed the borders. And of course, people had no access to real world, to some other countries. They couldn't visit except for some certain occasions where they needed. It was a business trip or something like this. And I remember, and I still do know, that a lot of my grandparents and some parents, they're afraid to travel. Right now, they're afraid of the other world. They would prefer, I don't know, the sightseeing of their own country instead of go and see something abroad, which is okay. I mean, I get it. I understand because they were brought up in a little bit different regime, in a little bit different country with all the restrictions. And that was tough. And especially when my mom, she was almost 20 years old, there was a coup in Russian Federation. So the Soviet Union changed into Russian Federation. And I remember that was really, I don't even remember this, but my parents and my grandparents, they had to survive. And I remember when my mom was 18 or maybe 20, they had no income because they couldn't find a job, or the job they had, it was like they paid chicken pigs, and my mom could afford some bread, and she couldn't even afford anything, practically anything. And they had to spend my, let's say, grandma's or mother-in-law's pension to afford at least something. Then my mom, she got a job in a restaurant business because there is a difference between United States, where Gen X was developing the small business and they were establishing some new business, and in Russia we started this journey only in maybe mids of 90s, and some fresh, let's say, ideas and new cuisines, they floated to Moscow in maybe late 90s, 1998. So my mom, she found her first job in a restaurant, and she was a cleaner, and she got paid a lot of money for being a cleaner because the owners of this restaurants, they were from Switzerland, and they had great salaries. And to compare salaries, my mom in 90s, she as a cleaner earned $500. So back then it was a lot of money, especially for Russia Federation, and an engineer was earning $400. So there is a comparison. And then my mom, she started working as a cashier a little bit later, and she got, the salary was up, but not that much. It was like $550 back then. And then she could, if she had overtime and over, let's say, scheduled shifts or something like this, she was double paid. And that was a great time for my family, but the rest of Russia, the rest of, let's say, population, they had to suffer. And the criminal activity was insane. And I have a couple of examples where people got missing. And one of our neighbors, she gave birth a couple of not a couple of years ago, and her husband, he was in this band, I don't know, not even band, but he was a gangster, I guess. And when he wanted to quit, he got missing, so he never saw his son. I can tell you in 90s that was a regular thing, that was a regular situation to have gangsters all over the country, and no one was following the laws. And frankly speaking, it's really interesting to say, but a lot of these gangsters, they got to politician system later on. So they have become politicians, which is interesting. It's really interesting. I'm not saying every single person, but some of them, they really had some shady business back in the 90s, and now they're kind of like participating in the ruling. I don't know if it's everywhere in the world, but it's always different. But let's talk about generation, like the boomers. My grandma, she can read some news and she's using some cell phones, and she's not really good with like typing and all of it. She's just reading news and that's it. My other grandma, she's really bad at this. She's just like probably not using her cell phone, just calling and doing some regular stuff. And as well as my dad, he's really, really like bad at this. He's bad, though he's a Generation X, but still he's the worst in technologies and whatsoever. But if we're talking about China, I mean, I lived there in 2018, and right now, back then, people were with great phones. I mean, even grandparents, old people, all of them had cool phones, better than mine. And right now, they don't have any money. I mean, like any banknotes. They're using their phones, and everything is with phones only. So you can't pay with banknotes. You're only using your phone. And it's interesting to see, but a lot of this Chinese who are over 70, 80, 90 years old, they adapted and now they use it. So I guess it's more about your willingness to adapt to the society, and maybe you have no choice because everyone is paying with their phone. And it's a little bit different problem with maybe Russia, because a lot of old people like, I'm not going to learn new technology. I'm going to have my banknotes, try to take them from me. It's really hard with them, but still, step by step, they're learning to use credit cards, at least credit cards. I'm not talking about QR codes. It's too far for them. And a little bit about politician system. I guess it's just like policy itself. Generations, most of generations, and I believe all generations, boomers, builders are probably not alive anymore, or just some people who are still living. They're super, super old. The boomers and maybe the Gen X, most of the time they're like, trying to shame you for the progress that is happening right now. They don't really want to adapt, and that is a huge problem because millennials and maybe even Gen Z, we have like some misunderstanding with these generations. And unfortunately, I see the tendency of so many countries where the president, and I'm saying this about every single president of every single country, that maybe 80%, maybe even 90% of these presidents, they're over 70 years old, which is crazy. And this is insane, in my opinion. How can you rule a country? You are basically a boomer, I believe, maybe Gen X. How are you picturing yourself following the tendencies of a new generation and creating the world for a new generation if you are literally stuck in your old thoughts and mindset? I can't say it's the same for everything, but I do believe that most of this, let's say, triggers and even wars, I believe, is because of this old mindset. Why is it so difficult to have someone as a president who's a little bit younger than 50 years old, maybe a little bit over 45, 50? It's a little bit easier for this person to adapt new systems and new ideas for the citizens, to the population of the country. And if you're over 70, just relax, spend time with your grandkids and just like let it go. I believe maybe not millennials, but at least Gen X can take over. And I see a lot of the government, they have maybe even 80% of, let's say, workers who are literally over 70. What is going on? I mean, you are old. Just let it go. Let it go. And of course, you can see that I have my own thoughts. And of course, I'm not saying that you should do this way. But frankly speaking, it's a little bit hard to see how this generation, the boomers, they're trying to rule and have some laws that are literally not working in the modern society, especially TikToks, Instagram, YouTube, all of it. It's in a huge pace, in a so fast mode and pace that a lot of these people, they have no idea how to use it. And you're saying that they need to rule the country. It's super fast. That's why I guess you need like a little bit different mindset, a little bit different brains to, get in this mode together. And especially boomers, I told you that most of them, they had a great economy. They had a lot of like housing, building and construction, all of it. So I guess the builders, they set the tone, they set the pace for the boomers. And the boomers, now they're literally just ruining. Look at the economy around the world. Look at the whole situation that is happening right now. All of it, I guess, maybe, I believe, if people weren't that stubborn, and stubbornness most of the time is a quality of an old person. Most of the time. Like, a lot of the times when I talk to an old person and I say, like, maybe you should try this instead of that, and they're like, no, I have a pattern. I got used to this tradition, so you should adapt to my traditions. They don't really want to adapt to some new traditions. For example, a lot of the situations where, like, my family, we are not talking, we're not, let's say, communicating with people that are rude to us. And I learned the hard way. Whenever you see, not even see, but whenever you face some rude people, it's always better to avoid this. Someone who's jealous, someone who's rude. And you just need to stay away from these people because they're literally gonna ruin your life, as a matter of fact. And I see my husband's family, and they have this tradition that whenever anyone said rude or mean or jealous kind of like comment to you, you should just like, forget about it and smile and say, oh, thank you for calling me, I don't know, some rude name, and keep on talking to this person and keep on coming. So they would literally, I don't know, like maybe curse you or say some nasty things. It doesn't work for me and it doesn't work for my family. And they don't really want to accept this fact. They have their own tradition and they think that everyone should follow their tradition. It's not this way. You should probably have some traditions and adjust them to your family. My husband and I, we have, let's say, certain things that we do ourselves and we don't really involve our relatives. And I told him that we need to take actions and we need to, let's say, do something. We discuss it. We discuss it in my family, I mean my husband and I. And if we want to know like a third party opinion, we would ask if we need this. But unfortunately, a lot of people, they think that they need to express their opinion, and my husband and I, we need to follow this opinion. It's not true, and we're not going to do this, and they have to accept this. That's why this is a difficulty between different generations. My grandma told me when she gave birth to my mom, they were thinking about the name, of course, to my mom and my aunt. They were like thinking about certain names, and my great-grandparents said, oh, all the names you picked, they're trash. So they're really bad. And they named my mom for my grandparents. And it was well received and accepted, let's say, because back then your great-grandparents, the builders, let's say, had more power over your family as the boomers than it is right now. And my generation, millennials, and even Gen Z, we're like, no, we're not going to follow your tendencies. We have free mind, we're free-spirited, and it's really difficult for the boomers to accept this fact. I guess you should follow your heart, you should follow your intuition, and you shouldn't think of someone else but your family. It's more like you have to act in the best interest of your family, and if it's not resonating with you or your husband, your wife, your like spouse basically, with your kids, and you feel it's wrong, even if your relatives are saying that it's not wrong, it's right, well, who said that you should follow the pattern that was really popular 50 years ago and was accepted 50 years ago? It's a little bit different times, a little bit different economy, a little bit different political system, a little bit different of everything. Whenever you follow the tendency, and by the way, it's ridiculous, but my generation and my mom's generation, it was so much better years ago. And let's say the boomers, they actually had an access to so many, let's say, positive things that we can't have right now. For example, in the Soviet Union, if you worked a shift from 9 to 5 in a couple of years, and if you had a family with kids, you could ask for an apartment and you wouldn't pay for this apartment. And you heard me right. For example, my grandma, and my grandpa, they got their apartment just because they had a family. They were standing in a certain line, let's say. They were waiting for the apartment, but still they got it for free. And if you had a great position, I guess you worked for, an army, or maybe was a politician or someone in the Soviet Union, then you could get a great apartment in the center of the city. Believe it or not, it was depending on your rank, basically. And for now, of course, no one is going to give me a free apartment ever. Only if you work for a government. But mainly, I should pay my own money for my own apartment, and no one is going to give it to me. And I kind of get it. I'm not asking for an apartment, a free apartment, let's say. It's more about whenever my, let's say, grandparents or boomers are saying that, oh, we had a hard life and here and there. Yeah, they, let's say, suffered the World War II consequences, let's say. But at the same time, they had their work where they had a shift from 9 to 5. They didn't really care about some, let's say, problems that tomorrow you may come and there's not going to be any company to work for. And the economy was more or less stable. And they got their apartments for free. They didn't even need cars because most of the time they could use metro. And that was great for them. And still, they're having some perks. Right now, my grandma, she got her pension when she was probably 40 or 45 and maybe over 50, something like this. But now, the government in Russia, they increased the age of your retirement. And now women can retire only when they're 60 and men can retire when they're 65. And most of these people, they're complaining, and especially Gen X, because they're saying like, but we're so tired. When is there going to be time to spend this with our grandkids? When is there going to be the time where we can, relax, just relax? A lot of men, they're not living up to 65. I know it, just that is a tendency. Let's say my mom's classmate, he died this year when he was 50. He was 50 and he died. And a lot of her classmates, they actually died years ago. So who is going to work until 65 years? I don't understand. But it's a little bit different story. But these are boomers who are creating these laws. These are boomers. So they don't really care about others because the boomers, they already have their retirement benefits. They have their pensions. And they don't really care about other generations. But don't worry. Whenever my generation or Gen X becomes, let's say, in charge, maybe we will have some perks for us as well. So yeah, basically it's about mindset, about different upbringings, about different sources. And yeah, I guess we just have to live through this. Unfortunately, they don't understand that everything is developing while they're procrastinating. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you have your opinion, please let me know in the comments. And I'm going to see you in my next podcast. That's fine with me. Love you all, guys. Bye-bye.